All right. Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Bava Kama Daf Nun Hey, and we're starting 2 lines from the bottom on Nun Daled Amud Beis. For those of you who've been to yeshivas, this is one of the easier blot because we're beginning the parak of Hakones, which is learned by our children and or learned by us at some point in our childhood. So a bit of a faster blot, and then over Shabbos, as you'll be able to see, Nun Vav Amud Aleph is regular length, Nun Vav Amud Beis is short. So tomorrow night, I should say, will be a quicker blot and a half than usual. Shabbos is also not a very long blot, so hopefully the next couple of days will be a little less thick than the previous. So here we go. Nun Daled Amud Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. The Gemara says, Shal Rabbi Chanina ben Agil es Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Rabbi Chanina ben Agil asks Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Mipnei ma b'dibros harishonos lo ne'emar bahem tov. Why is it that in regards to the first of the Aser Sadibros, the ones that were broken, why is it that there we don't have the language of Tov? Ubedibros ha'achronos ne'emar bahen Tov. We do have it. And what is this pasuk that speaks about good? So take a look at the Rashi on the very top of the page on Nun Hey Amud Aleph. Ne'emar bahen Tov gabi kibud avaim tichsiv bahen lema'an yitab lach. That honoring your parents is good for you. So we see that the word Tov was used in the Dibros Shnios, but not in the Dibros Rishonos. So the Gemara here has the oddest of retorts, and the Meforshim really do struggle to understand this. The Gemara says, Amar lo, Rabbi Chia bar Abba said back to Rabbi Chanina ben Agil, he said, Amar lo, ad she'ata sho'alani lama ne'emar bahen tov. Before you ask me why it says the word tov, she'alani im ne'emar bahen tovim lav. Ask me first if it's there in the first place. She'eni yodea im ne'emar bahen tovim lav. I'm not even sure it's there. The Ma'aritz Chios in the back of the Gemara over here really struggles to understand this line. How could Rabbi Chia bar Abba say, I'm not sure if the word tov is in the Luchos Shnios? He pashat knew Chumash by heart. And if he didn't, he still knew that the word tov was in Kabedis Avicha B'Yasimecha, but Lamaisa, he knew everything by heart. So what is this odd retort? Anyways, he's not done talking, Rabbi Chia bar Abba, and he says, Kilach etzel Rabbi Tanchum bar Chanilai. Go ask your question to Rabbi Tanchum bar Chanilai. The question of why is it that the Luchos Rishonos don't have the word Tov, and why should you go to Rabbi Tanchum? Because the Gemara says Rabbi Tanchum was in the category of Shahaya Ragil etzel Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi Shahaya Baki ba'agada. Rabbi Tanchum bar Chanilai was always with Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi because they were Bekiim ba'agada. So Azal legabe. So Rabbi Chanina bar Agil went over to Rabbi Tanchum bar Chanilai, Azalagabe, Amarle, and then he came back to Rabbi Chia bar Abba and said, Mimenu lo shamati. He didn't know the answer to my question. Elakach Amarli Shmuel bar Nachum. I did get an answer from Shmuel bar Nachum. Who was Shmuel bar Nachum? Achi imo, the brother of the mother shel Rabbi Acha bar Chanina, or the Amrila. Some say it was Avi Abba shel Rabbi Achi Rabbi Chanina. What is the reason why? In the Luchos Rishonos, it does not say the word Tov. But in the Luchos Shnios, it does say the word Tov. Says the Gemara, Hol v'sofan lihishtaber. The Gemara says that the reason why the Torah does not include the word Tov in the Luchos Rishonos is because of the fact that we didn't know, but Benevua, HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew that the Luchos HaRishonos were going to be mishtaber. So he didn't want to write them in the Luchos Rishonos to have them be broken. Says the Gemara, what are you nervous about? Okay, there are a lot of letters broke in the Luchos. One of the words was Shem Hashem. But what, are you worried about the word Tov? What's the problem with the word Tov? So the Gemara says about a quarter of the way down on Nun Hey Amud Aleph, Sofan Lishtaber Mayhave. Who cares if the Luchos Rishonos are going to break? Oh, okay, so you broke the words. Amar Rav Ashi, Chas v'Shalom Paska Tova mi Yisrael. A little bit of a play on words is that we don't want Tov to ever be broken from Klal Yisrael. We don't ever want that to be the case. And so much so was this sensitivity of not wanting to be posek tov from Am Yisrael, that in the Luchos Rishonos, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew, he's omniscient, he knew that the Luchos Rishonos were going to be broken, so he would not write the word tov there so that they would never get broken. That's sugya number 1. Sugya number 2 is somewhat connected. Amar Rabbi Yoshua, the Gemara says in the name of Rabbi Yoshua, Haroeh tes bechalomo, if a person sees the letter tes in a dream, so then, simin yafelo, my taima, ilema mishum dechsiv tov, if you want to say because the letter tes is representative of the word tov, and therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu in your dream is giving you a siman of tov with the letter tes. That's not true, because we have the letter tes with negative words as well, which means to be swept away with destruction. Says the Gemara, no, perhaps Rabbi Yeshua was not talking about where there's a word with the letter tes twice in it, but rather chad tes ka'amrinan. We're only talking about one tes, and therefore that must be the word tov. Says the Gemara, even if you want to say that it's one letter tes, ema tum asa bishuleha, that there's impurities bishuleha in her clothes, and there we see the word tuma is with one tes, and that's a negative word. So says the Gemara, tes beis ka'amrinan. You're right. You're right. There are other words with the letter tes, but in the dream, what I was talking about is seeing the letters tes and beis. Says the Gemara, but there's what?
Tav means good.
Tav means good, so that's fine. So says the Gemara, that's a problem because there is a word with tes and beis in it that's bad. Ema, says the Gemara, tovu ba'eretz she'areh, that they drowned in their land. Ella, says the Gemara, a different answer. Why is it that seeing the letter tes is considered to be a siman bracha? Says the Gemara, just about halfway down, 2 lines before the wide lines. Ella ho'elu pasach bo hakasuv letova tchila shemi, because the first letter tes used in the Torah is with the word tova. Who knew? That's pretty far in. Says the Gemara, shemi breshis ad vayara elokim es haor kitov lo chsiv tes. The first time that the letter tes is used is by the word tov, and therefore, much like we have as a matter of precedent in the Torah, that when a word is used for the first time in the Torah, that's its primary definition. It's also true that the first usage of the letter tes in the Torah is connected to that word itself, which is the letter of tov. Therefore, even the letter tes by itself, retracting some of its previous answers, if a person sees the letter tes in a dream, that is considered a good thing. And as well, another dream Gemara, first of the long lines, V'amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Haroa hesped b'chalomo, if a person sees a eulogy in their dreams, chasu alav min hashamayim ufida'uhu, they will get mercy from heaven and they will be redeemed. That's because the word hesped and chas pad are viewed as similar. So chas is chasu, ufda'ehu from the word pad. So hesped is a notricon of sorts. Hesped is from the words has and pad, of being chas and redeeming a person. However, it's not visually seeing the image of a hesped, but rather v'hanimili bichsava. It's seeing the writings of a hesped. That is when a person will have divrei bracha. That brings us to the 2 dots halfway down. We had said in our Mishnah, which can be found on the top of Nun Daled Amud Beis, that there were a lot of things that were very similar about animals. I mean, if you just look back over on Nun Daled Amud Beis for a second, you'll see there that we spoke about Nefila Sabor, Afrasha Sarsinai, Tashlumei Kefel, Shavas Aveda, V'chulei, stuff that we focused on yesterday. But there was another line in that Mishnah that said that much as all of those rules apply by Hilchos Shabbos and a whole bunch of other areas, it also says, V'chein chayav v'ov kiyotze bahen. So we're going to be speaking now a little bit about birds, especially as it relates to the isser of crossbreeding birds. The isser of harbas, kilayim b'harva, of having 2 animals mate to bring about a different animal. These things are done with dogs all the time in order to crossbreed and create new breeds of animals. Halachically, not so simple. And says the Gemara, Amar Reish Lakish, Kan Shana Rebbe, here Rebbe taught us, Tarnagol, Tavas, Ufisyuni. These are 3 different kinds of birds: chickens, peacocks, and partridges. Who knew?
Were they hustle or trade at that point? Because it was.
What happens to them afterwards? I don't think so. I mean, some of these animals are not kosher to start with, but this is just a mating question. It's not a question of achila. We're not talking about can you shecht and eat that animal.
I understand that, but I'm saying like to own a dog that's been crossbred like that. Is there?
Let's first talk about owning a dog that hasn't been crossbred before we talk about a dog that has been crossbred. The Gemara is very sharp about it because dogs are mechutzafin. There's like fast. There's a big discussion, and halacha and mekubalim are off the rails about dogs. These are big discussions in the poskim. Okay, but anyways, I have no idea about the difference between the 2. But the Gemara is only talking about the crossbreeding of different kinds of birds. We have chickens and we have peacocks and partridges. Kiloim zebazeh. The Gemara says that there's a din of kiloim. Says the Gemara pshita. Why wouldn't it be kiloim? We don't crossbreed animals. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Chaviva, mishum de ravu behade hadade. The reason why is because these animals live in a similar habitat. So perhaps the Gemara is recommending in the Havamina, perhaps we should assume that if you have animals that live in a similar place, therefore there may not be a crossbreeding issue. Says the Gemara, that's not true. Ma'udatema min chad, who you might have thought that they're really one min, because even though really, kingdom, phylum, species, all of those, they're not the same, but maybe because they live in the same place, they're mincha, they're one type of animal. Kamash malan, that they're not. Is that if the animals are biologically different from one another, then there is an isser of them to be paired together. Omar Shmuel, avaz, avaz habar, kilayim zebazeh. If you have a regular duck and a wild duck, those are kilayim, even though they are somewhat similar. This is probably where you'll find more of a comparison with dogs, because it's different genres of similar animals. You have whatever two dogs are that they would do kilayim, that they would try to crossbreed. They're not the same dogs. They look similar, maybe, but they're not the same dogs. So here too, by the ducks, the Gemara says that by ducks, that there's a din of kilayim if one is a regular duck and one is a wild one. Maskif lo Rabba bar Rav Nasan my taima. Ilema mishum dehai arich ku'e v'hai zutar ku'e. This one has a longer beak and this one has a shorter beak. Elamayata, if that's true, gamla parsa, if you have a Persian camel, the gamla taya, if you have an Arab camel, the high alim kue, the high katin kue, this one has a longer neck, this one has a shorter neck. Hachanami davu kilaim zebazeh. We would have assumed that there would have been kilaim there as well, and while we don't learn this from here, the assumption of the Gemara is that that's not kilaim. So therefore, says the Gemara, how then do we define this example about the ducks, that they're different, or the geese, however we define the word avaz? So the Gemara says, Ella Amar Abaye, two possible answers. Ze beitzav mi bachutz v'ze beitzav mi bifnim. In one of the animals, the scrotum, the testicles are external to the body, and the other is that they are internal to the body, which is considered significant enough of a difference that mating them together would be an isser of kilayim. And Rav Papa Amar, it's not about the males, it's about the females. He says, Ha te'una chada be'asa b'shechla. One of these animals, when it ovulates with only one egg per ovulation. Ve'ha te'una kama be'asa b'shechla. And the other animal ovulates multiple eggs during one ovulation. Very subtle biological differences. You may not be able to literally tell the difference on the outside other than really being an expert in these animals, but it's not about the aesthetics of the animal. There's a certain functionality difference between them that makes it kilayim. What were you saying?
No, how would they know about the females, how many eggs they produce?
There must have been something there, but whatever physical features were there were not the reason why it was kilayim. I mean, they might look a little different, but that wasn't why it was kilayim. The reason why it was kilayim is because they ovulate differently. So they might look different.
Right. My question was, how did they know?
How do they know what?
How did they know about the ovulation cycle?
The birthing rate. And they were, I guess, I don't know. There has to be something. Ovulation of birds.
Attention to chemistry and biology.
Ovulation of birds yields eggs. All they have to do is see what the egg production is. It's not, that's pretty much it. Is that correct, doctor?
No. You're sending me on a wild goose chase.
Come on, Sandberg, that was your line.
That was a good joke.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
You guys are, and Sandberg. He took the average age of humor down by about 20 years with his joke last night. You weren't here last night.
But it was a good.
He said that the cow was very smart. He went to Oxford. It's gewaldic. Such a great line. I've told like 20 people about your line last night. I loved it. It was clever.
I heard you retelling it as if it was your own joke, though.
Incorrect. What? Whose joke was it? Oh, it was Reb C's.
So great.
Yeah, but it's okay. You quote.
You used it well.
So he was just.
He used it
maybe
well.
the
He was just now. Last night he
Just
wasn't.
this second.
Last night he was maybe Godleslow. Then today's maybe.
Not know about this ovulation cycle for these animals. This is-
Okay, Mark.
Let's
Let's go. Okay. So says the Gemara, we're 8 lines before the end of the parak. The Gemara says, Amar Reb Yirmiyah, Amar Reish Lakish. Hamar bia shnei minim shebiyam loke. If one puts together 2 different creatures from the sea and they cohabit, that is an Isser de Oraisa being marbia kilayim, of having two animals mate that should not be mating. My taima, what's the reason why? Because Amar of Ada bar Ava mishmei deula asya leminehu miyabasha. We have a gzera shava. By Rechava asks the question. This is just unbelievable. The Gemara asks a crazy question. Hamanhig, a person is traveling and he's being pulled by two animals. Be'iza, he's being pulled by a goat with one string. Vishibuta mahu, and he's being pulled by a fish called the shibuta with another. So he's driving on the border of the water. All right, he's got a carriage. He has a shark pulling him, or whatever a shibuta is, some kind of fish pulling him with one string, and a goat pulling him in the other, and it's working perfectly. It's working out great. Says the Gemara, Mahu. Mi amrinan, do we say, Kevan de'iza lo nachis b'yam, v'shibuta lo salik liyabasha, lo klum avid, that since goats don't go in the water, and since water doesn't, and since shibuta, the fish don't go on dry land, lo klum, lav klum avad, that he didn't do anything. Namely, that these two animals can't have an isser of plowing together, of pulling a plow together, because they're different genres. You have water-based animals and land-based animals. Odilma, or perhaps hashta mihas kamanig, but perhaps the Gemara says, who cares? Lamaisa, the animal's being pulled one way or the other. Says the Gemara in classic Jewish form, we're going to ask a question on the question. Wait 1 second. Maskif la ravina, elameata, chiber chita v'seora biyado v'zara chita ba'aretz, u'seora b'chutz la'aretz. Let's say in regards to kilayim by a field, that I have in my hands, I have wheat and I have barley, and I'm standing at the exact threshold line between chutz la'aretz and Eretz Yisrael. And I plant a little bit of my chita in Eretz Yisrael, and I plant the barley, the seora, right over the line in Chutz La'aretz. So there says the Gemara, Hachanami de Mechayev. You're going to say that we're going to be chayev in that case? They're different countries, they're different properties. One of them is Medina Yisrael, the other is not. Those are totally different. So the Gemara says, Amri, that's a bad question. Hachi hashta. How can you possibly compare the question of Chutz La'aretz in Eretz Yisrael versus the fish and the goat pulling the carriage? Why? When it comes to kilay akarem or kilay, the vegetation that's being put there, the Yisrael only applies in Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, plant whatever you want outside the line of Eretz Yisrael. Who cares what it is? However, in our case, hacha but in our case of the shibuta and the iza pulling the carriage, both of those are on a level playing field, not in regards to their living in habitat, but lemaisa, they're both pulling. What's the difference? They're not like different spaces where one has a shaykh space like Eretz Yisrael and one is chutz la'aretz. They're both just land and water. So the Gemara doesn't have an answer to this question.
Is kilayim tluya on being in Eretz Yisrael?
Not for harva, not for mating, but yes, for planting.
You could plant this, if you were in Chutz La'aretz, you could plant the two together, no problem.
I can't speak for psak. There might be a din d'Rabbanan somewhere out there, but I'm just saying midoraisa, the isser d'oraisa of kilayim is in Eretz Yisrael. That's exactly this Gemara. The Gemara says that you will not be chayiv for planting chita 1 inch away from seora if what separates the two of those is the kedusha of Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah, but the havamina is that it's one that, not necessarily that it's, like there's a differentiation, it doesn't make a difference, because one's on the other side of the line and one's not. That could be seen as a differentiation instead of it only applying in Eretz Yisrael.
That is what it means. It means that in chutz la'aretz we have nothing. And even though their roots will intermingle, we don't care. Because the planting happened in chutz la'aretz and in Eretz Yisrael, 1 inch apart from one another. Doesn't matter. Hadron alach shor shenagach es hapara baruch Hashem. We have finished the 5th parak of Maseches Bava Kama. We're just about at the halfway mark of this Masechta, and we're also somewhere near 1500 blot, give or take, in Shas. We're getting there. We're getting there.
Yep.
All right. Says the Gemara, starting a new parak. I should let you take over at this point because he's been learning this all year. Here is parak hakones. This, he closed the Gemara. He got the whole thing shak levatari. He's going to nail it. Says the Gemara as follows. Hakones tzon ledir. We're going to pick up on the fact that we are now talking about tzon as opposed to shor. The Gemara will deal with that at the end of the day today. Yo, stop talking, bro. Shh. Hakones tzon ledir. If people put tzon, smaller animals, goats, sheep, and they put them ledir inside of a pen, the na'al befaneha kiraui, and I, the Baal, lock the gate properly. and after I locked it properly, the animal escaped and managed to cause some damage. The halacha is that I, as the owner, am pater. I didn't do anything wrong. I did everything right. This is what we would call in halachic terms shmira pchusa, as we spoke about earlier in the Masechta. I did my minimal requirement. It's a reasonable minimal requirement. Now, obviously, if lo no'al b'faneha kiroi v'yatavizika, if I left the gate open and the tzon get out and they decide that they want to destroy your car, so okay, then I'm chayev because I'm a fool. Why did you trust that that animal would just stay put? Animals are not known for being naturally self-disciplined. Nifritza belayla osha pirtsua listim v'yatzavizika. Let's say that the animal was broken out at night, or that listim, a third party, broke the wall, and therefore animals escaped, and then they caused damage. Pater, you, the homeowner, are pater. And while it's not articulated here, whoever in fact is guilty will be held accountable. Hotzia listim chayavin. If listim take the animals and they pick them up and put them over the fence and say, go run wild, and they cause damage, then listim are chayavim. Then the criminals are held accountable. Hinicha behema. Oh, shemasra lechereshota excuse me. Hinicha bechama. If you leave an animal out in inclement weather, it's extremely hot, and even though your shmira was there, but he was so intolerable of the heat that he jumped over the wall very high, more than what was normal, or broke through the wall. Oh, shemasra lechereshota v'katan. Or if I, as the Baal, irresponsibly gave over the animals to a cheresh, a shota, or a katan v'yatzvizika, in that case, chayev. What if in all of these cases I'm not the guilty party because masra leroa, I gave it over to a trusted employee, and my employee is a bardas. I hired him. He's a shepherd. So what happens in regards to the shepherd? Any din that would apply to me, nichnas haroa tachtov. The roa, the shepherd, takes on the same halachic burdens that I would have taken upon myself. I'm just entrusting him. And because he's a bardas, he absorbs and takes upon himself all of the halachic realities that apply to me. Nafla lagina v'nehenes. If an animal falls into a garden and it benefits from the food there, either because it fell on them or ate them, so mishalemes mashenenes, then it will pay. Yarda kedarka v'hizika. If an animal walks into a field on its own, which means I did a bad job of shmira, then mishalemes mashehizika. Then it pays for what it damages as well. Ketzad mishalemes mashehizika. How do we calculate the amount of money of damages when in fact an animal goes into someone's yard and damages? So says the Gemara, we do a simple subtraction math equation. Shaman, we measure base sa be'osa sada kama ha'seyafe. How much is a base sa, which is a large measurement of land? What was its market value at this particular before all the damage was done? V'kama hi yafe. How much was it worth? Minus how much is it worth? And whatever the difference is what I, the Baal of that animal, would have to pay. Reb Shimon Omer, achla peros gemurim, if he ate completed peros, ripe fruits, mishalemes peros gemurim, just pay back. Just he ate 8 apples, how much is each apple? 99 cents. Do the math and pay. Simple. No subtraction. So it says the Gemara, im sa, whatever the cost is, it is. And we'll dig into a lot of these pieces later on. But let's start with the first part of the Mishnah. The Gemara has a brisa that's somewhat similar to our Mishnah, Tanu Rabbanan. We're a third of the way down on Nun Hey Amud Beis. We'll be stopping 5 lines from the bottom at the first of the long lines. Ezehu karoi ve'ezehu shelo karoi. What is considered to be a shmira that is reasonable, and what is considered to be a shmira that is unreasonable? Deles sheyechol la'amod beruach metzuya. If the door that I use to close the pen can withstand a regular wind, again, what we call a shmira pchusa, so then zehu karoi, that's considered appropriate, responsible, minimal, appropriate, responsible shmira. You did a fine job. She'ena yechol la'amod beruach metzuya. If the door that you used cannot handle a regular wind, then you are an irresponsible person. Zehu shelo karoi. Amar Rav Mani bar Patish, man tana muad desagile b'shmir b'chusa. It's very interesting, says the Gemara, that in our Mishnah we have an assumption that a shmira b'chusa is considered to be acceptable. Why is that the case? It must be, says the Gemara, that it's Rabbi Yehudahi. Ditznan, there is a Mishnah, and we've learned this Mishnah before. We saw it on Daf Memhei. We will see it again later in this Masechta. And the Mishnah reads as follows, just about a third of the way down on Nun Hey Amud Beis. What does the brisa teach us? Kashu baila b'mosera. If I, as the owner, tied up this animal with its reins, the na'al b'fanav kiroi, and I lock the door properly, the yatsa v'hizi can still, the animal escapes. So the Tanakama, who we'll soon see as Reb Meir says, echad tam ve'echad muad, whether the animal is docile or dangerous, chayav divrei Reb Meir. He says that you're going to be held accountable in such a case, which is a little bit interesting. He doesn't seem to like the Shmira Pchusa model. He wants us to do a little bit more. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Tam Chayev. Rabbi Yehuda distinguishes if the animal is a docile animal, you're chayev, and muad pater. Why is that? Shenemar v'lo yishmeranu ba'alav v'shamor huzeh. You're going to be pater because you actually did lock up the animal. So machlokas between the Tanakama and between Reb Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Lazar Omer, ein lo shmira ela sakin. This was a shita we saw earlier, that when you have an animal who's established already as a muad, the only shmira that is acceptable for an animal that's muad is killing it. That animal can no longer be kept alive if you plan on not paying any bills. The second that animal damages, no matter what you're on the hook, it's a muad. The only way to fix a muad is by killing it. So therefore, our Mishnah seems to be like the shita of Rabbi Huda, because Rabbi Huda says that by muad, you can be pater. How so? With shmira pchusa. Very good. Says the Gemara, not necessarily true. Afilu tema Reb Meir. We could even say that this brisa that we learned is like the shita of Reb Meir. How so? Shiny shein v'regel. The world of shein and regel, which was the damage of tzon, that they basically will eat things with their teeth and they'll trample on things. Torah miata b'shmirasan. It could be that Rav Meir was speaking about in general, about damages in general. But when it comes to shein v'regel, the Torah took the higher standard of shmira and lowered it, and even Rav Meir would agree in this case. How does this work out? To Amar Rebbe Lazar, some say it was Rebbe Lazar, and some say it was a Mishnah. Historically, very interesting. Rebbe Lazar was a 3rd century Amora, which means that there was a period of time of about 75 years where we weren't sure if this was a brisa or not. It's not. That's a fairly long time in regards to learning, fairly long time, and we weren't sure. What was written in this brisa / memra? Arba advarim, 2/3 of the way down. There are 4 things that haTorah miata b'shmirasan, that the Torah lowered the threshold, the standard for shmira. Ve'eluhein, here is what those 4 things are. Bor ve'esh, shein v'regel. And we're going to go through all 4 of them to show where the Torah, or maybe even why the Torah lowered the standard from perfect shmira to shmira pchusa. Bor, says the Gemara, dichsiv, ki yiftach ish bor, oh, ki yichra ish bor v'lo yichasenu. The pasuk says that if a man doesn't cover a pit, he's held accountable. What's the diuk? Hachisahu pater. If the bailim did cover it, it worked. Why didn't they have to fill it in? The best way to fix a problem with a bore is to fill it up with dirt. Why does the Torah tolerate a lower level of shmira with a bore to just say you have to cover it? Covering it is a band-aid solution to a problem. Oh, it must be that the Torah lowered the level of shmira by bore. We don't need shmira me'ula, of filling in the bore. Rather, we're okay with just covering it with an appropriate cover. We spoke about an appropriate cover. Is the wood thick enough for camel, for shore? Is it wormwood? V'chule. Next, Eish is another example where the Torah lowered its standard to Shmira Pchusa. Says the Gemara, Eish, Dichsiv, Shalem Yishalem HaMaviris HaBe'era, Da'avid Ke'ein Mavir. The only time that fire is deemed to be at a higher level of Shmira is in regards to intentionality. But if you have some level of Shmira, that's considered acceptable. Shein, what about an animal consuming food with its teeth? The word uvir bisteacher is referring to shein, and unless it's like beer, which is fire, which is arson and intentional, that's when we have a problem. But as long as there's a minimal shmira, that's fine. And regel, says the Gemara, is dichsi v'shilach ad da'avid ke'ein v'shilach. There too, in all of these cases, there has to be intentionality. Otherwise, regular shmira works. That also explains how our Mishnah could even be like the shita of Rav Meir. And the Gemara says 4/5 of the way down, 15 lines or so from the bottom, Vitanya. We have a brisa of v'shilach zehar regel. When we talk about v'shilach, that's what an animal tramples on when it walks. V'cheinu omer mishalche regel hashor v'hachamor. We saw this drasha earlier in the Masechta, much earlier on Daf Beis. That's how we know that the word v'shilach is talking about regel, because it has the word regel and mishalche in the same pasuk. And uvir, when it says that it consumes in this way with ubir zehashen, v'chein hu omer, and here too we see the same language, kasher yevaer hagalal ad tumo. And that's also a reference there. So the Gemara makes a diuk of taima to avid kein v'shilach uvir. When is it that we say that you're going to be chayiv if you do v'shilach ubir? That's if you're intentional. But halo avid, if you don't do something intentional and you had shmira pchusa, then lo, then it would not be a problem at all, and you would not be chayiv. You would be pater. The Gemara then says, I can prove that this is true from our Mishnah. Amar Rabba, mas nisan nami deka. Our Mishnah actually has a raya davar for this idea. The katani tzon. Because what did our Mishnah say at the top of the page? Hakones tzon ladir. Asks the Gemara the question that I foreshadowed earlier. Michti, b'shor ka'askinan v'asi. For the last 54 and a half plot, all we've been discussing is shor. Basically, that's been our whole discussion. All of a sudden, things change. Why would you do that? Nisni shor. Ma'ishna de katani tzon. Why did you bother changing over to tzon when we've been talking about shor? So the Gemara responds, Lav mishum, and with this rhetorical retort, we're going to stop tonight. Lav mishum de'atora miyata b'shmirasan. It must therefore be that the reason why we switched over to tzon is to teach us that our level of shmira is a little bit different by tzon, and that we have a lower level of shmira. And lav mishum dekan, or detzon, Karen luksiva bay. There are no horns by these animals, and therefore shein v'regel hu diksiv bay. But there is shein v'regel by these animals, and therefore v'kamash mulan the shein v'regel de muadin hu. We therefore see that these are muadin, and therefore shmira pchusa is a reasonable approach here. Shmamina, that it's true that we have lowered our shmira here. We'll stop right here. Tomorrow night, Emir Tashem will pick up in person with Nun Vav and Nun Zayin Amud Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful night.